Welcome everyone to the Nestle Nutrition Institute and the Wyeth Nutrition Science Center Symposium on Nurturing the Brain, Body, and Behavior. There will be 3 talks in this session. I will be giving the first talk. My name is Raanan Shamir. I am the director of the Institute of Gastroenterology, Nutrition, and Liver Diseases at Schneider Children's Medical Center of Israel, and also a professor of pediatrics at the Tel Aviv University. These are my declaration of interests, and as I said, I will give the first talk on feeding our infants and toddlers, present and future consequences. We will first discuss definition and concepts, then health outcomes, and I will use allergy as a model, and specifically we will discuss peanut allergy, and end up with the ESPGHAN recommendations on complementary feeding. So first, definition and concepts. We define complementary feeding as the process starting when breast milk alone is no longer sufficient to meet the nutritional requirements of infants, so that other foods and liquids are needed along with breast milk. However, many years ago, it was shown in 5 European countries that solid foods are introduced before 4 months in almost 40% of formula-fed infants and in close to 20% of breastfed infants, and the authors concluded that complementary feeding is introduced earlier than recommended in a sizable number of infants, particularly among formula-fed infants. And as you can see, I don't know if you see from the far, but in the US and the UK, the numbers are even higher. Why should we introduce complementary feeding at all? Well, first of all, the volume of human milk ingested by exclusively breastfeeding, and we always encourage breastfeeding and exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. About 6 months, it becomes insufficient to meet the requirements of macro and micronutrients. There are issues of texture, taste, and oral skills that will be discussed later on, and there is also the question of tolerance. When should we do it? Well, first of all, around 4 months of age, our body, first the systems, the renal, the liver, the intestine, are ready to process the complementary feedings, and there is a range of ages when infants attain the necessary motor skills to be able to cope safely with complementary feeding. This cartoon is talking about averages. And we are moving all the time towards adopting family food at around 12 months of age. However, this is individualized, and not all infants are meeting these requirements at the same time, and we should be attentive to these individual variations between children. The first randomized controlled trial looked at high-income society and randomized 119 children either to be exclusively breastfed for 6 months or being introduced to complementary feeding at 4 months of age. And first, they looked at growth, and both groups grew similarly, and then they looked at iron status. And as you can see, there was a difference in ferritin levels, but both are at the normal range. So there is higher ferritin when you're introduced to complementary feeding at 4 months. However, it doesn't really is associated neither with iron deficiency or iron depletion. The recent, well, it's already 5 years old, systematic review concluded that moderate evidence suggests that introducing complementary feeding at the age of 4 months instead of 6 months offers no advantage or disadvantage in iron status among healthy full-term infants. and that there is insufficient evidence on the timing on complementary feeding introduction and other micronutrient status outcome. The next topic I want to touch is the health outcomes, and we're using allergy as a model. And specifically, we're talking about peanut allergy. And I would like to remind you that at the beginning of the 21st century, if you wanted to prevent allergy, the notion was that you should avoid exposure to allergens. So a group of researchers from the UK and from Israel looked at similarly genetic populations, two cohorts, one from the UK and one from Israel. In the UK, they avoided peanuts because they thought it will reduce peanut allergy. And in Israel, you will see in a minute why they did not. So first, they did a questionnaire looking at the prevalence of peanut allergy, and also they used a validated questionnaire on a small sample to look at the consumption of those children. There were religious, Jewish, Ashkenazi Jews that are similar, but part are living in Israel, part are living in the UK. These are old by now because she's 9 years old and he's 7 years old now. These are two of my grandchildren. And you see this snack, this is a peanut snack that children in Israel are craving for. By the way, it's ultra-processed food. This is another issue, but they consume peanuts. And as you can see here, indeed, in Israel, there was a significantly higher consumption of peanuts, peanut protein. So the median consumption in Israeli infants between 8 to 14 months of age was about 7 grams. It was 0 in the UK, and they were exposed about 8 times, 0 times in the UK. So at that time, people thought, well, there should be less allergy in the UK. However, the prevalence in the UK was close to 2%, while in Israel it was 0.2%. And despite accounting for atopy, the risk for peanut allergy between the countries was almost 10 times higher. And this led to the LEAP study, where they randomly assigned 640 infants high risk for peanut allergy. They had eczema, egg allergy, or both. And what they did was they did a prick test, and they recruited the negative ones if they did not respond to a challenge of 2 grams. They did look at those with a response of 1 to 4 millimeters, and they gave them incremental doses to see whether they can be recruited or not. And those who met the inclusion criteria for 5 years got 2 grams of peanut protein 3 times a week, so 6 grams a week, or avoided protein. And as you can see here in this slide, either it was the intention to treat, the per protocol, or even the intention to treat with the worst case imputation. Consuming peanut at the young age was associated with reduced prevalence of peanut allergy. In 2023, the systematic review from the group of Bob Doyle have shown that earlier versus later introduction of peanuts peanut protein is associated with less peanut allergy. And this group went further on. They took the LEAP study, the study that I just described. They added the PAS study, which is a study that looked at what happened with those with normal risk that were not in the LEAP study, or the high risk that were not part of the LEAP study. And they added the EAT study that Professor Papadopoulou talked about in the previous lecture. And combined, they analyzed the data. And as you can see in this graph, there is a risk reduction that is smaller for every month of delayed introduction until 1 year of age. So if you introduce peanut later, then your chance of reducing the peanut allergy is smaller. So that's about peanuts. The burning question is also cow's milk, but on Saturday at 10:15 in the morning, there will be a session dedicated to the diagnosis of and prevention of cow's milk allergy. So I hope that you will be there and we can discuss cow's milk allergy. We can't finish without talking about eggs, again, from the systematic review, also for eggs. Earlier introduction is associated with less egg allergy. And lastly, very important is that if you introduce earlier to many allergenic foods, there is also less food allergy. However, one word of caution, there was a high withdrawal rate in the intervention group. So lastly, the ESPGHAN recommendations. ESPGHAN recommendations say that allergenic foods may be introduced when complementary feeding is commenced anytime after 4 months of age, and specifically, of course, 17 weeks, so we're not confused with 4 or 5 months. Infants at high risk of peanut allergy should have peanut introduced between 4 and 11 months following evaluation by an appropriately trained professional, and maybe we will change those recommendations based on the fact that if you introduce at 11 months rather than 4, you reduce your chances of reducing the risk. We did not talk about it, but those of you who were at the Hot Topics this morning, this was discussed in length. During the complementary period, more than 90% of the iron requirements of breastfed infants must be met by complementary feeding. And the problem is that cow's milk is a poor iron source. So it is preferable, we need to introduce cow's milk, but in small amounts, not as the main drink. And this is contradictory to the recommendations of the WHO, again discussed at Hot Topics this morning, and we don't have time to discuss it today, but they recommend that between 6 and 11 months, cow's milk, animal protein, will be the main source rather than infant formula, and this is a cause for high controversy that, again, we will not discuss it today. And also, between 1 year and 2 years of age, they also recommend cow's milk. And again, this deserves a session of its own. So finally, how would we optimize complementary feeding? When? Not before 17 weeks, but by 26 weeks, so between 4 and 6 months of age. You heard at Hot Topics today, Professor Shayevska about gluten that should be introduced between 4 to 12 months. And starting complementary feeding does not mean stop breastfeeding. We just need to introduce the allergenic foods in order to prevent allergy. Again, there is a difference between high-income countries and middle and low-income countries. What? It should be adequate source for iron and zinc, and I would just say consider the main source of milk. And how? Repeated exposure, I hope that it will be discussed in the next talk about repeated exposure and how we encourage children or infants to start their behavior, their healthy behavior towards being a healthy adult. And I would like to thank you for this talk.